And we're live on YouTube. Thank you everyone for coming to another NPM Open RFC meeting. Today's date is Wednesday, November 4th, 2020. If you haven't already, feel free to add yourself to the HackMD meeting notes doc that I've shared in chat. And we'll be following along in the agenda that is pasted there. That's from issue number 274 from the NPM RFC's repo. Just quickly want to note that any correspondence in these calls and on the RFCs themselves is all under a code of conduct. Please be kind and mindful of each other as we speak and discuss the RFCs themselves, and please raise your hand if people are talking, and be mindful and just kind in these discussions. I wanted to give the floor to anybody for any announcements that they may have. I know that at least for our team, we shipped another patch release of NPM 7 yesterday. So that is 7.08. So if you'd like to get that, you can get in the normal ways, npm install -g npm add 7 to grab it. And we're continued to have a cadence of almost 2 releases weekly. So usually Tuesdays and Fridays have been the cadence the last couple weeks at least, trying to address the feedback of everybody that's using NPM 7 today. So appreciate the usage and the feedback that we're getting. Yeah, we'll hopefully eventually get back to a bi-weekly cadence once things settle down, probably closer to the end of the year. But right now we're sort of cutting at releases as fast and furious as we can. So that's the big announcement from our end. Anything else that I'm missing? Nope. Cool. So let's jump into the agenda. The first item on the list is RFC 273, NPM Workspaces Config Management. This was queued up by Roy, who's also coined this, I think, as Workspaces V3. And I'll let him maybe speak about it a little bit more and maybe discuss why it's good to have these things in threes, or the best things come in threes.
Sure, yeah. I just made the joke during our stand-up that as a good 90s kid, every blockbuster needs to come in a trilogy, right? So I made a third part 3 RFC for the workspaces. But no, that's just a joke. Like, there might have more. You never know. So yeah, basically this one is one of the few feedbacks that I've kind of seen around for workspaces already. So trying to tackle the specific scenario of users that do not want to necessarily tweak their package JSON files themselves. Like I know a lot of people are comfortable with just using a workflow where you npm install, npm uninstall, and let the client take care of the package JSON. And it was more metadata that you don't want to touch. So this is kind of providing that for the workspace's configuration. So basically enabling people to add, list, remove. These were the first 3 things that I surfaced here. So I think, well, if not yet, let me paste the link to the RFC here so that everyone can check it out. But basically, yeah, I just wanted to surface the RFC is a very short one and start collecting feedback. But yeah, not sure about the order of the work, if we might end up working on this before the second one, but I think the second one has been more, has had more feedback, so probably more actionable than this one. So this one will probably sit for a while to collect some feedback too, see what people think of it. And yes, it's a very lightweight one on purpose. I want to gather feedback from the community.
This is dependent on the other one as well, to some
Not
extent.
necessarily. No. This is really about managing the workspaces entry in your package JSON. So we don't necessarily depends on the second one, but the second one has the group thing feature.
Like the
That,
aliasing, and that's
yeah,
the thing is like
I
the
think.
naming of the subcommand kind of would have to come first, right?
Well, yeah, I kind of had some ideas about that too. Like I might update the RFC later on with them, but basically like enabling a way to declare an alias or a group by adding an argument like dash dash group and then a name, so that the thing you're defining would go under that group. But that's a separate one. I just wanted to surface the very basic functionality for managing the workspace's key in the package JSON.
So I have a
Go
question.
ahead, Jordan, and then Wes. Yeah.
When I want to add a single workspace, like I guess let me put it a different way. The most common thing I expect is that a repo is going to be configured with a glob pattern, so that in fact there isn't a lot of need to add or remove individual workspaces, except for if my glob pattern is packages/star, which is likely to be the most common, and then I want to explicitly ignore packages/tests or packages/example or something. What happens if my glob is packages/star and I do workspace rm packages/test?
That's a good question. We would need some kind of like way to exclude it, or we would just blow up that glob and remove that item.
And blowing up the glob would prevent future packages from being automatically added, which is the intention.
Right.
Similarly, if I do workspace add packages/star, do you add the glob pattern, or do you blow up the glob and probably lose my intention, which is that all future packages in that folder will be added?
So it sounds like an ignore list would have to be created if you're.
Yeah,
well, you're thinking or imagining. Right?
If I didn't have the add and remove command, like the ls command seems straightforward to me, right? Like that should just work. But the add and remove, if I didn't have those available, the question I would ask myself is, what would I do with the config manually? And what I would probably do is add glob patterns like everywhere I can, and use like a bang or something to exclude the things that I knew I didn't want in there. And I, like thinking of the current use cases I have, pretty much all of them would be packages/star, and all of them would have some form of bang packages/tests or something like that. If you would have example repos in there that I don't want to necessarily be included or whatever. And similarly, but then like the additional wrinkle is that like I actually want my packages/tests to be considered a workspace for installing, but like I might not want them to be publishable. And like it kind of, there's a lot of questions I think that are unanswered that this starts to dip into, which is like the usability around these things, right? So like ls makes perfect sense to me, but like when I use Lerna, what I usually do is I say that a bunch of things are packages, but I want Bootstrap to only do, like to not do the root. So like in Lerna, I have root as one of the packages because like usually my like repo docs are in the root, and I want to lint those as part of my like run all the workspaces test command, right? But I want Bootstrap to ignore the root because npm install already populated that and things like that. And there's a way in Lerna I can do that. And similarly, like if I wanted to run a workspace publish everything command, I would want it to be a little smarter than like, don't just, looking at the private truths. I would want to be able to way to like target things more granularly. And I don't know, this is sort of vague because I just like this RFC was just posted, so I haven't had a lot of time to think about it. I just kind of wanted to like ask about those edge cases and what you're thinking there.
Yeah, I know that's great. I think that's the reason why I opened it, right? So it's great. Thank you. Yeah, but to be honest, I don't know. It might be that we end up in a position where maybe add and remove just does this very simple thing of adding and removing entries from that array, and that's like kind of solve like the problem field for 80% of users, and the other 20%, like it's probably easier to manage manually. but I want to have that conversation. That is a very good point.
Yeah, so my thoughts are, Jordan said a lot of what I was kind of thinking here. I think that if we were going to say that, we're never adding any more config to package.json other than like a list of packages, or that list of packages is never going to be any more sort of fancy than it currently is, just like a list of globs, then add and remove just as a way to add and remove things to that list, so that you don't like misspell the word workspaces or something, is pretty reasonable. I think though, if we're going to, we need to kind of be cognizant of the fact that if we're going to add new subcommands that are sort of blessed ways to modify this thing, that we have a clear understanding of what configs we want it to be having there. You know what I mean? Because we don't want to kind of paint ourselves in a corner with that. Another, the counter argument to my counter argument is, maybe we want it to be simple. And if we're talking about adding a config, that means we have to have a much more complicated command semantics. Like maybe we should just not add that config, or not have the command, the helper commands know about it. So it's like, look, if you want to go do something fancy, that's fine. You have to add a JSON in your, in Vim or whatever.
Wes, did you have anything you want to ask or bring up?
No, I heard you say my name, and I was wondering why, because I didn't actually raise my hand. So no.
Oh, I thought you had. I thought you'd like unmuted at the beginning and wanted to.
If I did, it was an accident. My bad.
Okay, apologize. Cool. No, I appreciate, Roy, you bring to this up, and this definitely makes sense. Sounds like there's already like some good like details about this that would maybe round out the workspace implementation. So
yeah, you can definitely sit there for a while. If anyone wants to provide feedback on the PR, feel free. It's welcome.
Well, yeah, we should also, we should use this as sort of a forcing function to be like, okay, well, if a simple add and remove doesn't meet some use case, great. What kind of config set up in package.json would meet that use case? And, is it too complicated, or is that, should we just say like, look, you got to like tough, you don't get to use packages /star if you want to have fancy ignore stuff. Or do we want to maybe like tweak the settings that we let you put in package.json and then kind of circle back and say, okay, now how do we add a helper command to do that efficiently?
Yeah, I agree with either we increase the scope of the spec for workspace, like so the globbing patterns either support bangs like Jordan mentioned, and you've given them.
Oh, I think they do already.
Yeah, no, they do.
Yeah, do they?
Yeah.
Oh, so then there we go.
Already.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's only about how you would manipulate that with the client, right? That's when it gets tricky.
I don't even know if there's a library that can like produce the ideal glob, or can like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of need that. You kind of need a library that could take a list of globs and like a list of ignore patterns and like collapse them to the most aesthetically pleasing similar glob or something. And like that seems like a hard problem to solve.
Yeah,
Or you just have an ignore list.
I have a few things that do that.
Oh, cool.
We do have there is precedent for files in terms of files to ignore, like files to include.
That's pretty much. I think the workspaces config. I took a lot of from the files. Forgot the name of that package, but yeah, it was
npm pack list.
Yeah, pack
But
list was heavily inspired.
Programmatically alters the files field currently, right? So like, what happens if you do workspace add after I have packages /star and bang packages / example -star, and then I do workspaces add packages /example -special, right? Like, I don't think there's a bang bang. I don't know, maybe that works, but like it would seem really unintuitive to me if through the use of those commands I ended up with a long list of glob and exclude patterns that like mathed out to what I wanted, like it would be really hard to understand what that did as a human.
Yeah, now that you mentioned files, we could also add a similar thing to managing your files too, right? We could do that.
NPM files add.
Yeah, and I think if we've solved or answered all these questions for one of them, certainly it answers them for the other one. But it seems a difficult problem to solve because the thing that people will expect is not always going to be universal, and the thing that's pragmatic to implement is not always going to match the things people expect.
Right. And how much easier is this really making it for folks? I haven't read through the entire RFC, but does this create like the folder, Roy? Like
No. The idea is just manage. Yeah, it's just about managing the key workspaces in your package.json. So yeah, it will probably cater to the public that really don't want to deal with any of the internals, right? Oh, just show me the commands. I just run it and use them, right? But yeah, so it is very much a reality that we might just decide that this is not worth implementing, right? So I pointed that as the alternative there.
Or not implementing now, like, until the feature is a little bit more mature. I think that there are, there's other things besides just adding, removing, and listing workspaces, which we should probably put under that same npm workspaces command. Like we're running tests within a given workspace, for example, or just rebuilding a particular workspace. So yeah, and I think, if adding and removing, like, as long as, like, the first step is make it semantically do what you say. So if I do npm workspaces add packages /star, and then follow it with npm workspaces remove packages /test, that should take me into a state where everything in packages other than test is listed as a workspace, right? Then the next step is, okay, we've just created a glob pattern. And also if I add a new thing to packages that isn't named test, it should automatically be picked up. A follow-on kind of enhancement to that is make it so that if I read the package.json file, I will understand that that's what's happening. To your subsequent point, Jordan, like you don't want to have kind of nightmare of programmatically generated globs. If you look at the actual like regexes and globs that are programmatically generated for stuff like npm packlist and node.semver and some of these other things, like it'll make your hair curl. So we definitely don't want to like expose that to users who are just trying to get their work done.
And I mean, I thought part of the motivation for the aliases was because passing glob patterns on the command line without quotes is a foot gun. And add and remove for workspace config seems like something that requires passing glob patterns on the command line.
Oh, yes. It is something you do with that specific foot gun.
But to reiterate, I think ls is just kind of like feels like a no-brainer to me. Like you should just add that, unrelated to the rest of this discussion.
Right. So I just posted in chat, based on the RFC for workspaces v2. So I just stole like the workspace filter that you have there, Roy. So what would happen in the case of like npm init? Wouldn't that be like, could you init a new workspace? Like with that, maybe?
No, I don't think.
Could we modify init to support workspaces?
Well,
and
we
then
could
that
also
would almost be like add.
We could also do, I mean, if we had an add command, or we just had some way that we understood how we programmatically add a workspace, we could add a npm workspace init command, which then lets you will like run create React app or whatever init runner you suggest, ask you for the name of the workspace to be added, and then do all its stuff within there.
But that immediately opens the floodgates of all of the existing valid use cases for, well, I have these 17 bespoke commands I want to run in specific workspaces. How do I do that? And I forget, maybe this was answered in the original RFC, but like, if I want to run an arbitrary command in a specific alias or a specific pattern or something, like, how do I do that?
I don't think
that doesn't seem
I don't think that's a terrible
to,
idea.
Extend npm init and then extend the next thing and then extend the next thing.
Well, so this would be adding an init subcommand to the npm init, or to the npm workspaces command.
Right,
so,
but then you have to add run and test and start and publish and like literally everything one at a time.
No, but I think you might be touching on the point of the second workspace that brings all the commands, but enabling workspace flag, like the RFC pointed there, -- workspace, and then you put on the name of the workspace you want to run the command on.
And that's great for npm commands, but what if I want to run cat in a subset?
Okay.
Right.
I see, okay.
So that's what learn it exec already gives me for learna. And so that's sort of what I want for npm workspaces is run this arbitrary shell command that npm has no business understanding or dealing with in the appropriate directories that match my workspace config in parallel, with appropriate output and exit codes. Like, or in parallel or in serial, doesn't really matter. But
it seems like a good idea. Like, workspace exec does not seem weird to me at all. It seems totally like something you'd want.
But and of course the next step is somebody trying to volunteer me to write an RFC, which is fine. But like I guess what I mean is that seems like that it would sort of obviate all the questions around, well, do we add a -- workspace thing to which npm commands, or do we add, do we make all the npm commands also work underneath as a subcommand to workspaces and so on? Like with exec, you just kind of don't have to deal with that, right? You just kind of...
Well, it becomes our building block. We still may want to implement those other things for convenience, but
sure,
it's a step towards being like, okay, and then anything that we missed, you run npm exec that, npm workspace exec -- npm test. Okay, great. Like
it's the same way that npm run is the building block for npm test and start and the other special ones.
Yep. It is also there is a npm explore command which will take an arbitrary. You can run npm explore foo, and that will drop you into a subshell underneath your foo package, right? Like in that folder. And if you run npm explore foo -- cat readme.json, it will, or readme.md, like it'll do that.
Right, but like it can't drop you into more than one subshell at once.
True, but what I'm saying is like the precedent for like go into this folder and then run this arbitrary command. Like we have code that does that. It's not like that's a completely ridiculous idea, is what I'm saying.
Right, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing npm does. It's totally within our purview.
Cool. So I've been trying to take notes here at the same time as jumping in. So apologize if my note taking is off. I'll have to clean them up after this. But yeah, this is a good start to the conversation. Obviously, if folks can add some comments and some feedback actually in the RFC itself, that'd be great. I know this is sort of planning for the future. This might be something we queue up, in the next couple months. So yeah, appreciate any feedback on it. So yeah, let's move on to the next RFC though, number 272, adding prefer dev field to package JSON by Ginden. I do not think they were able to join. And I'm not sure if anybody's had a chance to look at this. I'll paste the link to the RFC since it was opened yesterday.
I didn't comment this on it. I looked at it yesterday, but like my immediate question is that some things, like there's a lot of things that should be dev deps, but like are also dependencies of other stuff. So like the examples in this specific PR are TypeScript, TSLint, ESLint, let's say, right, are kind of like top level command line tools. And in this case, that makes sense, right? That they're pretty much always dev deps, but like they might be, if I were to take an incorrect guess as to how standard works, for example, maybe it invokes ESLint underneath the hood.
It does.
And in that case, ESLint would be a runtime dependency of standard. And so it wouldn't really make sense for ESLint to ace itself out of those use cases by marking itself as preferred dev. So like, I kind of like feels strange to me because like prefer global was a problem for similar reasons, right? Which is that that's not something that it turns out that's not something the package author actually has the expertise to know about it's about itself, right? Like the package author can know I'm an executable, but that is not the same as I should be installed globally. And there's many other reasons why prefer global fell out of vogue, but like I almost wonder if it would be the same problem where like it's the package author doesn't have the context to know whether in dev or prod they'll need to be used. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is preferred dev is sort of overly presumptuous for a package author to specify for exactly the reasons you list. And you know, the other thing is that like there's effectively, for things that are not published to the NPM registry, like there's really no difference between dev and prod devs, right? It's just like it's basically just like an arbitrary field for like, you know, that you can exclude those if you want as part of your deployment. But there's quite a lot of apps out there that just install everything as regular deps. You know, Webpack being one of them, and one of the, you know, what they do with their CI is they run a build and then push the assets up to a CDN or something. Like that's an extremely common use case. So if we said, well, you can't have Webpack has to be a dev dep, I don't know. It just feels like it's adding friction without much value. And if the only benefit here is like bloating the size of node modules, yeah, I don't know. It seems kind of like an easy enough thing for the consumer to manage if they care about that. And if they don't, then okay, they don't care about it.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I think that there was another, I don't know if it was ever an RFC, but something was brought up about like bin dependencies at one point. And the without getting into the details, the rough concept is things that are run, that my package needs to run as a command line tool, I don't actually need them to be deduped amidst the rest of my deps and dev deps. And like, I don't need 73 copies of ESLint on my machine, but I do need to be able to specify version numbers for ESLint in 73 projects. And maybe addressing that use case would be more appropriate for preferred dev, because like there wouldn't be, like you would just install your executable things as a bin dep or whatever it is, like whatever the alternative is. Like, I feel like that would just kind of become the norm. And so there wouldn't really be a need as much for people to guess as to whether something is runtime or dev. I don't know, just thinking out loud.
Yeah, even that case, I mean, yes, you don't need 73 copies of Webpack and React and, you know, anything else on your machine. But I mean, if they each have slightly different versions or, you know, other peer deps that get resolved, like you kind of do need to have 73 different copies.
Sure.
And to the extent that they are the same versions or the same contents within those versions, like that seems to be better addressed by really tackling that, you know, the problem of repeated deps head on. Like, who's to say you need 73 copies of McDerp on your machine either, even though that may be a production dependency.
That's fair. So
I think that like, if we're going to unify it, like what that looks like is something more like Tinker PNP, and not like forcing stuff to be dev deps. The furthest I would be willing to go, if there was like really strong consensus for it, would be that if prefer dev is true, then we might warn if you're not explicitly saving prod. But yeah, doing more than a warning feels way over the line. And
Right,
even
and
the warning feels like kind of I don't know, just noise without a lot of signal.
well, and you'd want that warning to only show up for the top level package, like for the person who's adding that thing directly as a dep, and you'd never want anyone anyone using standard to see the warning about standards use of ESLint.
Right, and that is how this is phrased. It's just when you're installing the library with prefer dev equals true, and you're about to save it as a production dep, then it would throw unless you've explicitly set save prod.
So just to add, though, I understand that it might feel like a little bit of an overreach, but this is definitely something that happens all the time, right? Like I very regularly see something and I'm like, that's not supposed to be a prod dep. And it doesn't hurt anybody, but like this is a real problem. So maybe there is some validity in throwing in a warning, in some future.
Yeah, a warning is like I said, like I could see the case for that. It would help a lot of devs from accidentally adding something that should probably be the dev dep. And especially if there's like a clear way to ignore that warning by saying, no, I really mean it, like don't yell at me.
Also, maybe it would be worth starting off only warning when you're directly installing it explicitly, right? Not on like an NPM-I, but on NPM-I ESLint.
Right. So this would be when you're, yeah, I guess that is ambiguous. I interpreted it when installing library with preferred dev equals true as a production dep. I kind of interpreted that as like, if you're doing npm install foo, but not, like if you're about to save it to your package JSON, basically. But
yeah,
not
yeah, it doesn't explicitly say, as far as I can tell, in the.
Right. Yeah, that would be a good thing to clarify.
Awesome. Can we maybe post some feedback in the RFC itself then?
I'll comment my piece about the explicit part.
Yeah, and maybe based on this, we might be comfortable throwing a warning in the future.
Yeah, warning would be fine.
Okay. Cool. So if we can add that actually back to the RFC itself, that'd be good. And
this would be Semver minor on the CLI, right? Because this would be a new package JSON feature we're supporting.
Yes. Just added the label for that. Awesome. Just want to be mindful of time since we have 25 minutes left, and I know we've got four more. Yeah. So just wanted to move on. If there's any other thoughts, feelings, feel free to add back there. Moving on though, issue number 264. So the RRFC for optional files key in package lock to specify the files to include in node modules. This is by Rafi. I'll link the issue itself in case folks haven't seen it. This was opened last week or 2 weeks ago, sorry.
So this, I really like, just come out of the gate here. I really like the use case here, and I like the command, like npm install -- files equals, some list of things. What I don't like about it is putting that in package lock JSON, because that is ephemeral and can like cause problems. I think what might be a better thing to sort of spend some time bike shedding would be, how do we specify that as like a dependencies meta field in package.json rather than in package lock JSON. I know the fallback is not terrible. You just end up installing all of React. But why have that fallback? Why not, what about cases where it does matter? The other hazard I could see is I might only depend on, React.production.min.js, but I might have another dependency that depends on React, and now I can't properly dedupe against it unless I also add the files that it needs. So I could see this having some unfortunate side effects if there are multiple deps. But we could always sort of unify all of the files of all of the things that depend on it. And if you have only one thing depending on something and it has a restricted file list, then we only unpack those ones. That would not be too hard to do.
So Jordan and then Christian.
Yeah, so I agree with your general feedback there, Isaac. But I think that it's a very bad idea to give consumers the ability to add API constraints, which are which files are included. In other words, like the RFC here says, like, advanced users of React might know what files they're using. I don't think that any user of any package should be considered advanced enough to know what files they need without actually having read all the source, which is an untenable requirement. And I also, like, if somebody installs this, but like in version 1.1, you know, this file has no requires, and in version 1.2 it adds some requires, then all of a sudden, if they rerun the install with that files command, or if this is stored in the meta field or whatever, that, like, all of a sudden that would break, and then it would be on the user to solve it, but it would also be on the maintainer to field that bug report. I'm wondering if maybe an alternative is to allow package authors to specify, like, file groups that then the user could opt into, because that way deciding which files are which is a decision left to the only person with the context to know that, the package author. But
right.
the decision to, like, opt into essentially, like, you know, preset prunes at install time seems like something that is safe for a consumer to choose and could totally go in, like, the peer dependencies meta field or some similar field.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, like, we sort of do have a way to specify file groups that you include in your package. It's right. And
right.
If you want to have multiple file groups, well, good news. You can have as many packages as you want, and each one has its own group of files. You know, Lodash does this. It's not uncommon at all.
Right.
And then we even, like, automatically include the documentation for each one of those file groups.
Well, without overrides, though, the package name is something that's important because it's used throughout the graph. So with overrides, I think that's a completely reasonable response to say just use different packages, and React should publish a different package for its, like, production.
No. I'm saying, like, there are 5 different groups of files that all comprise that together comprise React. Well, each one of those is a separate file, and what React does is require React foo, require React bar, require React this.
Yeah.
That. Like, that's the same thing Lodash does, right?
Right, but I'm saying that because the entire ecosystem depends on React, and it requires React / right. like I'm saying that like, I hear what you're saying as if they had done that in the first place, then everything would be fine. But since they didn't, and without overrides available, it's not really practical to tell the ecosystem to shift its require import specifier patterns. I mean, as you mentioned, Lodash, there's been a lot of back and forth about, like, in some code bases, do you import curly brace throttle from Lodash, or do you import throttle from Lodash.throttle? You know, and so on. Or do you import from Lodash / throttle? Like, that in practice, it's not actually a clear universal thing as to what you do.
Right. So if we had overrides, you could say everything that depends on React should in fact load React UMD production min.
Right, and you could do that in a scoped way as well, so that if you ran into the problem you were talking about earlier, where something else depended on React, it would get the full version, and then the deduping kind of works itself out.
Right.
I think that solves this use case, right?
Well, it shifts the burden onto the package author from the consumer. I mean, another easy way to solve this is with bundle dependencies. You can quite easily list something as a bundle dependency and add it to your Git repo and then just don't add the files that you don't need. And the result will be that when your thing is installed, it'll have a bundled version of React, which is only this one file. That doesn't work for peer dependencies, obviously, because it's going to be under your packages node modules folder. So with React specifically, probably
that's also not ergonomic if you're updating every week, like this bundled React, for example.
Yeah, I might just have a callus over that particular pain point because the npm Clyde does this.
Right.
Yeah, it's not trivial, but it's also sort of not the end of the world.
Well, and I'm not familiar with that many things outside of npm itself that do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I also suspect that it's a pain point that is somewhat uniquely experienced by the Clyde team.
Right. Yeah, bundled deps basically exist just so that the npm CLI can self-install. There's not many other good use cases for it, in my opinion.
So on this though, specifically, is the burden not on the end user anyways, like to maintain this file list in case the package that they've installed has changed where these files are living? And in that case, would it not be like, would not overrides essentially you like creating an alias for like a modified version of that dep, like would that not solve for what they're trying to do here?
Yeah, I mean, if you could just put an override that said React 16.8.0 should be my React 16.8.0.
Right.
Then,
yeah.
Okay, great, problem solved. I can make it be anything.
Right. And so that's kind of like what I would suggest to get this. I don't know if it would make sense to, I just feel like.
Yeah, it does turn the internal details of we've kind of treated like the specific files underneath a particular package as implementation, like internals, right?
Right. And
technically
and
it can be exposed, especially with exports, but like if I go from having one file to having 10 files because I've split stuff up for my own ergonomics, that has to be like a some major change, or else I break my users and I get a bug report about it.
Yeah.
Exports actually masks the files because you can like define the require interface, and like it can map to literally any folder structure you want. So you like before exports, you could look at your use of a package and you could absolutely infer how the file system was structured. So like inside that node modules folder, you can no longer do that. So it feels like the world where consumers have the ability to decide files is far different. And like in this case, they might even need to know to include package JSON files so that the appropriate type is present, so that the file extension is parsed properly, for example. Like type module, type common JS. Like it's a much more complicated problem than it used to be. And even then it wasn't a great idea for users to assume things about the file structure of packages.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm kind of coming around. I think that this is probably not a great idea, and does sort of run afoul of our some pretty fundamental design objectives as far as locus of control of different parts of the system. So I will post a comment and shut this down.
Cool. And then maybe also reference that we're hoping to ship overrides.
Right. So overrides would let you do this, and albeit in a slightly more elaborate way.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to maintain like that override, right? So like that's the other burden that they have, right?
Right, which you'd have to do in any other, with this or any other implementation as well.
Exactly. Like you're maintaining a file list here that might change based on the distribution like changing. So yeah, cool. So let's move on then to our RFC 250. Provide the possibility to reference license file. I know we've spoken about this before a little bit. And I'll paste the issue.
So yeah, we talked about adding a license file field, I think in our last call. License file is better than license URL just because the thing can change without, like the license of the thing can change, and then you have one URL that you want to update, and you can't change what it applies to. If you get into those conflicts really quickly.
Yeah, without, I guess, license file, did we agree it would be a path, in like a relative path within the...
Well, what I brought up last week was multiple licenses and how that works.
Yeah,
Like,
I think my sense on that is like, okay, if you have multiple license files, like SpeedX has a way to do that. And you can specify a license file with either the default one of those that you want people to use, or a file that says, here are the 3 licenses, or here are the 3 license files. Having that field be an array feels a little excessive. That said, we could make it, a string or an array. Like we do that with some other things anyway. It's not such a big deal. I sort of feel like this reminds me though of like back when we had the repositories field, because people had multiple repos for a given package, and ultimately it was just kind of more of a headache than anything else. And it was rather painful to sort of walk that back. So I think if we're going to start with one, if we think we might need it, it's maybe better to just start with license file singular, and then like see how far that gets us. And if we have to make that be an array, then okay, we can add more easily than remove.
I don't even think we need this. Like if we allow a user to then name their license file something different, then that also means that GitHub will not auto detect it, and presumably other repo providers also have some form of license heuristics, right? So by adding this field, like we're either creating confusion or additional cost on all those other platforms.
Well, we could require that it be something that starts with LICENSE.
I mean, sure, but like alternatively, like what is the use case? Like, why can't you name the license file license or license.md?
Because you may have, so it's not uncommon to have like license-GPL, license-MIT.
Right, but as we talked about last week, you can make a license.md file that says, for GPL, click here. For MIT, click here. And then name them whatever you want. Yeah,
exactly. So
like, what is the case where it's actually doing anything except saving a click, perhaps, for having a differently named file? Like adding a new field to package.json, adding a new requirement for all license-based tools, which includes hosting like platforms. Like for this, like that's a lot of cost, because the very tiny percentage of dual license packages might want different license files and might want to avoid having an extra click through a like centralized file. Like it doesn't feel worth it to me.
Yeah, I think if we end up having to, if we end up requiring that the file be named license.something anyway, like we already auto detect that.
Right.
Wow, Jordan, you're shutting them down today. I feel like I'm the one pitching the new features, and you're telling me to do less work. This is great.
Don't worry, I'll cash those points in with something else.
And then there will be a RFC opens up like next week, but takes those all back.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to shut things down, right? Like these are use cases worth solving, and I think clearly like the license field should have been built in the first place to accept either a SPDX string or an object that included a file path pointer, right? But like given that it wasn't, the cost to transition to that feature set seems not worth it to me, is where I'm going. Hopefully that's slightly more charitable than I was coming off prior.
No, that's fine. I'm busting your chops a little bit. So I think, yeah, like the reason why we did not go with an object there is because SpeedX has this C license in file name field, right? So, which is not ideal, but it's sort of, it makes the tooling have to work a little harder. But it is definitely a workaround, right? Like it's the catch-all escape hatch to be like, hey, a human being needs to look at this because it's more complicated. But if you don't have a speed indicator, or if the file is something other than license.md, like, I don't know, specifying it and then also specifying the license file when there's this clearly established precedent for what the file name is feels a little, it does feel a little excessive to me.
So feedback in the issue itself, I guess, like sounds like we're probably not going to move forward with this.
Yep.
Or just like the amount of, yeah. The amount of ways to solve this exists already, like yeah. Okay. So let's move on then to second last item that's on the agenda today, RFC 217. So this is, we've discussed this multiple times, add registry per package per organization config. So I know this has come up quite a few times. I'll paste the PR for folks. I'm not sure if anybody's posted last week or after our call last week. I'm not sure if anybody posted on the actual issue itself.
Apologize. I think either I or somebody else was on the hook to do that. I definitely did not. And I don't recall exactly where we landed on it, whether we've said it's fine as long as it's only scoped, which this poster actually is requesting it just for scope packages.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we just agreed to leave the issue open, but I think we did say provide feedback.
Trying to go back to our meeting notes from last week.
I think there was some exploration that needed to be done on what it would take to do like a file, like a registry spec thing too, right?
Yes, that's what it was.
Wasn't it like we were saying there's like, at first we were saying there's two options, and then it was like, but we're never going to do one of the options, so.
Well, it's not that we're never going to. There are some other use cases addressed by it, but it is a little bit more of a hazard.
So I just posted the link to our notes from last week on this. I'm not sure if they're 100% accurate, because I think I was not sure if it was myself or Roy adding these notes. So
Yeah, I think it was me. Yeah, but I do believe we just, yeah, maybe it might be a good thing to take it out of the agenda and let it sit there for a while. I don't know. But I think that was the understanding from last time.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just, yeah.
Let it sit, let it mellow. Okay, well then we only have about 5 minutes left. Then there was the very last item has also been brought up before a few times, which is RFC 138. And this is add configurable data to HTTP header. I will paste that for folks. And I think we're still waiting on this to be updated. As far as I remember, the examples in the RFC itself are outdated. So I don't think Mark's been able to join the last few meetings. So I'm not sure if he's had time to look at this. I think that's the update there, is that we're waiting so the actual examples in the RFC match the expectation of how the ini file looks. Is that right? I think it's supposed to be headers instead of headers array.
Yeah, it should be a headers object.
Yeah. Okay. This is something we could also, if we're okay with like accepting it, we could potentially modify that on their behalf and land it.
Yeah, I just haven't gotten around to taking a crack at a implementation of this. It sort of just works in NPM 6. It does not work in NPM 7 today, just because of the way that we're a little bit more restricted in which configs we pass through to which dependencies. Yeah.
Yes.
So we would have to kind of add it to that to that flat options include list.
Okay. I mean, we don't have to have the implementation right to agree that we're going to do it, but and if it works in npm 6, yeah,
it helps to at least kind of take a quick pass at it just to see, like, is this going to make a bunch of stuff blow up? Is it expensive? Like, what are we actually kind of getting ourselves into?
For sure. Cool. Is there anything else anybody wanted to bring up with a couple minutes left here? Anything we didn't get to this week that we might want to make sure we get to next week? Anything that wasn't on the agenda that folks want to add? If not, I'll give you 2 minutes time back, and I appreciate everybody jumping on today. Hopefully you're staying happy, healthy, and safe.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.